My name is Rebecca Miller, and at 34 years old, I never imagined I would discover my own mother feeding my 6-year-old son Jamie dog biscuits. When I confronted her, she laughed and said, "If he dies, that is one less mouth to feed." I stood frozen, watching my father nod in agreement, adding that Jamie deserved worse for wasting their bloodline. In that moment, every childhood memory I had suppressed came rushing back, but I did not scream. Instead, I decided they would taste their own medicine. Before I tell you how I made my parents face their own hell, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to protect someone you love from the people who should have protected you. Life as a single mother was never what I had planned. I live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Oakwood, a small town just outside Chicago. The rent takes nearly half my monthly income, but it is close to Jamie's elementary school and has a small park nearby where he loves to play. Jamie's father, Mark, walked out 3 years ago when the responsibility of parenthood became too much for him. The last I heard, he moved to California with his new girlfriend and rarely remembers to call Jamie on birthdays, let alone send child support. Jamie is the light of my life. At 6 years old, he is bright, curious, and full of energy. He can name every dinosaur in his collection and knows more facts about space than I ever learned in school. His wild brown curls and hazel eyes remind me of myself at his age, though his kind heart and boundless optimism are all his own. When he laughs, his entire face lights up, and it is enough to make me forget about the stack of bills waiting on the kitchen counter. I work as a waitress at a local diner during the day and take on bookkeeping jobs in the evenings to make ends meet. Between the irregular hours and modest pay, I am constantly juggling finances, always one unexpected expense away from disaster. Jamie goes to after-school care until I can pick him up, which costs more than I can really afford, but it was our only option. Growing up, my parents, Barbara and Richard Miller, seemed strict but normal. They owned a hardware store in town that provided a comfortable middle-class lifestyle. Our house was always spotlessly clean. Meals were served exactly at 6, and there were clear consequences for breaking rules. As a child, I thought this was how all families operated. Only in adulthood did I begin to recognize the emotional manipulation and control that permeated my childhood. My relationship with my parents had always been complicated. After Jamie was born and Mark left, they made it clear they thought I had made poor life choices. My mother, Barbara, would make subtle comments about my appearance, suggesting that perhaps Mark would have stayed if I had tried harder. My father, Richard, would lecture me about financial responsibility, while reminiscing about how he had built his business from nothing. Their help always came with strings attached, which is why I had avoided asking them for childcare assistance for so long. Looking back, I should have recognized the warning signs. The way my mother would pinch Jamie's cheeks too hard when she thought I was not looking. How my father would call him soft when he cried after falling down. The comments about how I was spoiling him by comforting him. But I had spent a lifetime normalizing their behavior, convincing myself that they were just from a different generation with different parenting styles. When the accounting firm downtown offered me a position with better pay and benefits, it seemed like the answer to my prayers. The only catch was the hours. I would need to work longer days, sometimes into the evening during tax season. After calculating the costs of extended childcare against the salary increase, I realized I needed another solution. With great reluctance, I approached my parents about watching Jamie after school 3 days a week. "We are not a daycare service, Rebecca," my mother said initially, her lips pursed in disapproval. "Children need structure and discipline, not to be passed around like parcels." "I know, Mom," I replied, swallowing my pride, "but this job could change everything for us. Jamie and I could finally have some financial security." My father lowered his newspaper slightly. "The boy could use some toughening up anyway. Too much coddling makes weak men." They eventually agreed, though not without several more comments about Jamie being spoiled and me needing to learn responsibility. I was so grateful for the help that I ignored the uncomfortable feeling in my stomach. This was temporary, I told myself, just until I got established at the new job and could afford better childcare. The first week seemed to go smoothly. Jamie was quiet when I picked him up, but I attributed it to being tired after a long day. My mother reported that he had been well behaved after some initial adjustment. She had prepared dinner for him each night, and my father had even played checkers with him once. I felt a surge of optimism. Maybe this arrangement would bring us closer as a family. Maybe my parents would develop a loving relationship with their grandson after all. He ate everything on his plate, my mother told me proudly at the end of the first week. Not like at home, I bet. Children need firm expectations around food. I nodded, choosing not to mention that Jamie was typically a good eater. At home, he would happily munch on carrot sticks and apple slices, and he loved the dinosaur-shaped sandwiches I made for his lunch. Still, I was pleased that things were going well. "Thank you both so much for helping us out," I said. "This job really is a great opportunity, and knowing Jamie is with family makes it easier." My father grunted from his recliner. "Just make sure you are using this chance properly. No more excuses about money." As the days passed, I noticed subtle changes in Jamie. He became less chatty during our drives home and would go straight to his room instead of telling me about his day. I dismissed it as adjustment to our new schedule, and the excitement of the new job overrode any concerns I might have had. The extra money from my first paycheck allowed me to pay off an overdue electric bill and start a small savings account for the first time in years. Things were looking up, or so I thought. 2 weeks into our new arrangement, the changes in Jamie became impossible to ignore. My once exuberant, talkative son had grown noticeably quieter after visits with my parents. At bedtime, he began having nightmares, waking up, crying, and calling for me. When I would rush to comfort him, he would cling to me desperately but refuse to tell me what had frightened him. "It is okay, baby. You can tell me anything," I assured him one night as I stroked his hair. "I cannot," he whispered, his small body trembling. "Grandma said it is a secret." A chill ran down my spine, but I told myself not to overreact. Children often misunderstood adult conversations. Perhaps my mother had surprised him with a treat and asked him not to tell me so I would not think she was spoiling him. The first truly alarming sign came when I found food hidden in Jamie's room. While putting away his laundry, I discovered granola bars, apple slices turning brown, and crackers wrapped in napkins tucked under his bed and in his toy chest. When I asked him about it, his eyes filled with tears. "For when I get hungry," he said, simply, his voice so small it broke my heart. "Sweetheart, you know you can always come to the kitchen if you are hungry. We always have food for you." He looked down at his hands. "Not always." The next day, Jamie threw a tantrum when I told him it was time to go to my parents' house, something he had never done before. He wrapped his arms around my legs and begged to come to work with me instead. I called my mother to say we would be late. "He is manipulating you, Rebecca," she said sharply. "Children need to learn they cannot always get their way. Bring him over immediately and leave quickly. The longer you drag out goodbyes, the worse his behavior will become." Her words echoed the parenting advice she had given me countless times, and I found myself automatically responding to the authority in her voice. I drove Jamie to my parents' house, ignoring the sick feeling in my stomach as he sat silently in the back seat, his dinosaur backpack clutched tightly to his chest. That evening, I casually asked my mother how Jamie's day had been while picking him up. "Fine, once he understood the rules," she replied, her tone clipped. "He tried to refuse his lunch, but your father made it clear that was not an option." "What did you give him for lunch?" I asked. "Chicken soup and crackers. Nutritious and simple. None of those sugary snacks you let him have." Jamie was unusually quiet during the drive home and went straight to the bathroom when we arrived. I later found him standing on his step stool drinking water directly from the faucet, as if he was desperately thirsty. Over dinner that night, my father called. "The boy needs toughening up, Rebecca," he said without preamble. "You were stubborn at his age too, but you learned. He will as well." "What do you mean?" I asked, watching Jamie push food around his plate without eating. "Your mother says he refused to finish his lunch today. That kind of defiance needs consequences, just like we did with you. Remember the closet. Sometimes darkness helps children appreciate what they have." The casual mention of the closet sent a jolt through me. Fragmented memories surfaced, being locked in the dark hallway closet for hours after minor infractions, begging to be let out, the smell of mothballs and old coats, the complete darkness. I had buried these memories so deeply, I had almost convinced myself they never happened. "Dad, please tell me you did not put Jamie in the closet," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just for 20 minutes, builds character." I ended the call abruptly and turned to Jamie, who was now staring at his plate, his body rigid with tension. "Jamie, honey, Did Grandpa put you in a dark place today?" His eyes filled with tears as he nodded slowly. "The closet is where bad boys go. Grandma said you used to go there too when you were little." Over the next week, Jamie lost weight. Dark circles appeared under his eyes, and his teacher, Mrs. Wilson, called me with concerns. "Jamie seems unusually tired lately," she said. "He fell asleep during story time today, and he is not participating in class discussions like he used to. Is everything okay at home?" I assured her that we were just adjusting to my new work schedule and promised to make sure he got more rest. Privately, I began looking for excuses to pick Jamie up earlier from my parents, claiming work meetings ended sooner than expected or that Jamie had a doctor's appointment. Each time, my mother would make disapproving comments about my lack of commitment to the new job. Jamie's anxiety before visits became impossible to ignore. He would become physically ill on the mornings he knew he was going to my parents' house, complaining of stomach aches and sometimes even vomiting from stress. I was torn between my financial needs and my maternal instinct telling me something was very wrong. The new job was providing the financial stability we desperately needed, but at what cost to my son? The first serious argument with my mother happened when I arrived earlier than expected and found Jamie sitting alone at the kitchen table staring at a full bowl of soup that had clearly gone cold. "Why is he not eating?" I asked. "He said he is not hungry," my mother replied, "so he can sit there until he is." That is how children learn gratitude for food. "Mom, he has been sitting here for how long? He looks exhausted." "Only about 2 hours. You sat longer when you were his age." Another buried memory surfaced, sitting at our kitchen table as a child until late into the evening, not allowed to leave until I finished food I hated or could not stomach. "That is not how I parent," I said firmly. "If he is not hungry, I do not force him to eat." "And that is why he is so willful," my mother snapped. "Your permissive parenting is creating a child who thinks the world revolves around him." Jamie looked between us, his face pale and drawn. When I told him to get his backpack because we were leaving, the relief in his eyes was heartbreaking. In the car, Jamie whispered, "Grandma says I am bad because I do not like her food. But it tastes funny, Mom. It makes my tummy hurt." "What kind of funny, sweetheart?" "Like the time I licked the soap when I was little. That kind of funny." My mind raced with possibilities. Was my mother adding something to his food as punishment? The thought seemed outlandish. Surely, even with her strict parenting views, she would not actually tamper with a child's food. But then I remembered other incidents from my childhood. Hot sauce added to meals as punishment for talking back vinegar and juice when I had been too demanding about wanting a particular drink. That night, Jamie refused dinner entirely, saying he was not hungry anymore. When I pressed him gently, he finally admitted food is scary now. I made an immediate decision. I would find out exactly what was happening at my parents' house during these visits. No job was worth my son's well-being. The next day, I called in sick to work, determined to discover the truth. I dropped Jamie off at my parents' house as usual that morning, forcing myself to appear normal despite the knot of anxiety in my stomach. My mother raised an eyebrow when I mentioned having a half day due to a work meeting being canceled, but she accepted my explanation that I would return by lunchtime. Jamie gave me a frightened look as I left, and it took everything in me not to grab him and run. Instead of driving to work, I parked my car 2 blocks away and walked back to my parents' neighborhood. Their house was set back from the street with a high privacy fence, making it difficult to see into the backyard or most of the windows. I remembered from childhood that the kitchen window had a small gap in the curtains where they never quite met. If I could make it to that window undetected, I might be able to see what was happening inside. I carefully made my way through the neighboring yard and along the side of my parents' house, staying close to the shrubs to avoid being seen. As I approached the kitchen window, I heard Jamie crying. My heart pounded as I positioned myself to peek through the gap in the curtains. What I saw will haunt me forever. Jamie sat at the kitchen table, tears streaming down his face as my mother stood over him. In front of him was not a normal lunch, but a bowl filled with what were unmistakably dog biscuits, the same ones they fed their ancient German Shepherd Rex. As I watched in horror, my mother grabbed Jamie's chin roughly. "Open your mouth," she commanded. When Jamie kept his lips pressed tightly together, she pinched his nose until he had to gasp for air, then shoved a dog biscuit into his mouth. "Chew it, now." Jamie gagged, but did as he was told, his small body shaking with sobs. "Stop crying," my mother snapped. "This is what happens to children who waste food. If you had eaten your lunch yesterday, you would get real food today." Jamie choked on the dry biscuit, and my mother laughed, actually laughed, at his distress. "If he dies, that is one less mouth to feed," she said to no one in particular. "Your mother certainly would not miss the expense." The casual cruelty in her voice shattered something inside me. Without thinking, I burst through the back door into the kitchen. "What the hell are you doing to my son?" I screamed, rushing to Jamie and pulling him away from the table. My mother looked more annoyed than ashamed at being caught. "Teaching him a valuable lesson about gratitude and waste. Something you clearly never learned. By feeding him dog food, he is a child, not an animal. Children need discipline, Rebecca. You turned out fine, did not you? We did the same with you when you were picky." Another repressed memory surfaced, being forced to eat pet food as punishment for not finishing my dinner. The humiliation and helplessness I had felt, the grainy texture and rancid taste I could suddenly recall with perfect clarity. Before I could respond, my father entered the kitchen, his heavy footsteps announcing his arrival. He took in the scene, Jamie clutching me the bowl of dog biscuits on the table, my mother's defensive stance, and his face darkened. "What is going on here?" he demanded. "Rebecca is overreacting," my mother said dismissively. "The boy refused to eat his meals for 3 days, so I was teaching him a lesson." My father looked at Jamie with cold eyes. "Ungrateful brat, just like his mother was. He deserves worse for wasting our bloodline. No discipline, no respect." Jamie buried his face against my leg, trembling violently. I could feel his tears soaking through my jeans. "We are leaving," I announced, picking Jamie up and holding him close. "And we are never coming back." "You will regret this dramatic display," my father said, stepping toward me threateningly. "Without our help, you will fail just like you have at everything else. The boy will end up just as worthless as his father." I backed toward the door, keeping Jamie securely in my arms. "Stay away from us, both of you." "Put him down," my mother ordered. "He needs to finish his lunch. Children need consistent consequences." "The only consistent thing here is your abuse," I shot back. "Jamie, get your backpack. We are going home." Jamie scrambled to obey, grabbing his dinosaur backpack from the hook by the door. As we left, my father called after us. "You will be back. You cannot manage without us. You never could." In the car, Jamie collapsed into heaving sobs. Between gasps, he revealed the full extent of what had been happening. For 3 days, my mother had been feeding him nothing but dog biscuits as punishment for not finishing his soup the week before. When he had refused, they locked him in the closet until he agreed to eat them. "They said it would make me strong," he whispered, "but it made my tummy hurt so bad, Mommy." "Did they do anything else, baby?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm despite the rage building inside me. The floodgates opened. Jamie told me how my father had forced him to stand in the corner for hours if he spoke without being spoken to. How my mother had denied him bathroom access until he had an accident, then made him sit in his soiled clothes as punishment for being a baby. How they told him repeatedly that I did not really want him, that I had considered giving him up for adoption like his father wanted, that he was lucky they were willing to fix him before he became completely worthless. As he spoke, more of my own childhood memories resurfaced. The same punishments, the same cruel words, the same psychological torture disguised as discipline. I had buried these experiences so deeply that I had endangered my own son by exposing him to the same abusers. The guilt was overwhelming, but I pushed it aside to focus on Jamie's immediate needs. I drove straight to an urgent care clinic. Jamie's physical symptoms were concerning: stomach pain, a rash around his mouth from the chemicals in the dog food, and signs of dehydration. The doctor examined him carefully, her face growing increasingly concerned. "How long has he been experiencing these symptoms?" she asked professionally, though I could see the suspicion in her eyes. "I just found out today that my parents have been feeding him dog biscuits as punishment." I admitted, the shame nearly choking me. I had no idea. I would never have left him there if I had known. The doctor's expression softened slightly. "Unfortunately, I see cases like this more often than you might think. People trust family members with their children, not realizing the abuse that can occur." She turned to Jamie with a gentle smile. "None of this is your fault, buddy. We are going to make sure your tummy feels better." As the doctor treated Jamie and documented his condition, I sat in the plastic chair beside the examination table, mentally cataloging every sign I had missed, every warning I had ignored. How could I have been so blind? The answer was simple and devastating, because I had spent a lifetime normalizing my parents' abuse, convincing myself it was just strict parenting rather than the cruelty it actually was. "We need to report this," the doctor said quietly while Jamie was distracted by a nurse showing him a sticker collection. "What your parents did constitutes child abuse." I nodded, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. "I will do whatever it takes to protect him. They will never hurt him again." The medical examination confirmed what I already knew in my heart. Jamie was suffering from malnutrition and showing signs of psychological trauma. The doctor documented everything meticulously, from the chemical burns around his mouth, from the dog food preservatives to the bruises on his arms where my mother had gripped him too tightly. Blood tests revealed minor liver enzyme elevations consistent with mild toxic exposure, likely from the non-food-grade ingredients in the dog biscuits. "I am required to report this to Child Protective Services," the doctor explained gently. "But I want you to know that from what I can see, you took immediate action once you discovered the abuse. That will count in your favor." The following day, Jamie met with a child psychologist specializing in trauma. I sat in the waiting room, alternating between crushing guilt and smoldering rage. When the session ended, the psychologist asked to speak with me privately. "Jamie has shared some concerning information," she said, her voice professional but kind. "The psychological abuse appears to have been extensive and systematic." My heart sank as she detailed what Jamie had revealed. Beyond the dog food punishment, my parents had told Jamie that I was planning to abandon him, that he was a burden no one wanted, that he was defective like his father. They had made him stand facing the wall for hours if he cried, denied him water on hot days as character building, and threatened that if he told me about any of it, I would send him away for being a troublemaker. "The most concerning aspect is how calculated it was," the psychologist continued. "Your son describes your mother telling him that she was fixing him the same way she fixed you as a child. There appears to be a generational pattern of abuse that your parents were deliberately perpetuating." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I scheduled an emergency appointment with my own therapist that afternoon, leaving Jamie with his favorite babysitter, a college student named Amber who had watched him occasionally before. In my therapist's office, the floodgates opened. Memories I had suppressed for decades came rushing back, being forced to eat dog food, being locked in closets, standing for hours, in painful positions, being told I was worthless, unlovable, a burden. My therapist listened without judgment as I poured out the horrors of my childhood and my crushing guilt at exposing Jamie to the same abusers. "Rebecca, children who grow up in abusive homes often normalize the abuse," she explained. "It is a survival mechanism. You were not consciously putting Jamie in danger. You genuinely did not remember the full extent of the abuse you suffered. What matters is that you took action as soon as you recognized what was happening." Her words offered little comfort against the knowledge that my son had suffered because of my blindness. But they did help me understand why I had been so susceptible to my parents' manipulation, why I had ignored the warning signs, why I had continued to seek their approval despite years of mistreatment. The social worker assigned to our case interviewed me thoroughly about my own childhood and my relationship with my parents. She was particularly interested in the fact that my parents had deliberately recreated with Jamie the same abusive patterns they had used with me. "This shows premeditation and a deeply ingrained pattern of abuse," she explained. "It also explains why you might not have recognized the danger immediately. Generational trauma often works this way. The cycle continues until someone has the courage to break it. You are breaking that cycle now." A formal report was filed, and a temporary restraining order was granted to keep my parents away from Jamie. But I knew the battle was just beginning. I needed to collect Jamie's belongings from my parents' house, and I dreaded the confrontation that would inevitably follow. I asked my friend Sarah, who had witnessed some of my parents' mistreatment when we were children, to accompany me. When we arrived, my mother opened the door with an expression of smug superiority that quickly faltered when she saw Sarah behind me. "I am here to get Jamie's things," I said firmly. "I will not be bringing him back ever." "You are being ridiculous," my mother sniffed. "Children need discipline. You turned out fine, did not you? We were just doing what needed to be done. Feeding a child dog food is not discipline, it is abuse, Sarah interjected. And Rebecca did not turn out fine. She has spent years in therapy dealing with what you did to her. My mother's face contorted with rage. This is how you repay us, after all we have done for you. You were always an ungrateful child. Now you are an unfit mother who cannot even discipline her own son properly. Discipline is not the same as torture, I replied, pushing past her to gather Jamie's belongings. My father emerged from his study, his face dark with anger. You will regret this, Rebecca. Without our help, you will fail financially, just like you have at everything else. Maybe then the authorities will see that the boy would be better off with us. His threat sent ice through my veins. Would they actually try to take custody of Jamie? The thought was unbearable. You will never see him again, I promised. And if you try to interfere in our lives, I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of people you really are. Who would believe you? My father sneered. We are respected members of this community. You are just a struggling single mother with a history of poor choices. As we left with Jamie's belongings, my mother called after me. Blood is thicker than water, Rebecca. Family stands by family. Your ingratitude will come back to haunt you. Over the next week, my parents' campaign of intimidation began. Calls from extended family members questioning my mental stability. An anonymous tip to my workplace suggesting I was unstable and potentially neglectful. My car vandalized with a crude message scratched into the paint. Bad mothers lose their children. Jamie's nightmares intensified. He would wake screaming, convinced that his grandparents were coming to take him away. They said if I told you they would get custody, he sobbed one night. They said courts always give kids to grandparents over bad mommies. I held him close, promising that I would never let that happen, but privately I was terrified. My parents had resources and connections in our small community. They had always been skilled at presenting a perfect facade to the outside world while saving their cruelty for behind closed doors. The financial pressure mounted as I missed work for Jamie's appointments with doctors and therapists. My apartment building manager informed me that someone had complained about excessive noise from our unit, though we were typically quiet. It was clear my parents were attempting to isolate and destabilize us. The breaking point came when I received a certified letter informing me that my parents had filed for grandparents' rights, claiming that I was an unfit mother and that they had been Jamie's primary caregivers. The document was filled with lies. Allegations that I had a substance abuse problem, that I left Jamie with them for days at a time, that he was thriving under their care until I irrationally cut off contact. As I read their vicious lies, something shifted inside me. The fear and guilt that had plagued me gave way to cold, clear determination. This was no longer just about protecting Jamie from future harm. It was about breaking the generational pattern of abuse once and for all. My parents needed to face consequences for their actions, not just with Jamie, but with me as well. That night, after tucking Jamie into bed, he looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "Why do Grandma and Grandpa hate me?" he asked in a small voice. I sat on the edge of his bed, choosing my words carefully. They do not hate you, sweetheart. They are sick in a way that doctors cannot fix. They hurt people because they were hurt themselves. But that does not make it okay. I promise you that they will never hurt you again. Promise, for real, he whispered. For real, I said, kissing his forehead. No one will ever hurt you like that again. Not while I am here to protect you. As Jamie drifted off to sleep, clutching his favorite dinosaur plush, I made a silent vow. My parents would face justice, not just for Jamie's sake, but for the little girl I had once been, the one who had no one to protect her from monsters disguised as loving parents. The next morning, I called into work and requested a personal day. Once Jamie was safely at school, with his teachers alerted not to release him to anyone but me, I began researching grandparents' rights laws in our state. What I discovered gave me both hope and direction. While grandparents could petition for visitation rights, they faced an uphill battle if the parent objected, especially if there was documented abuse. I reached out to a domestic violence support group that offered free legal consultations. The advocate I spoke with listened attentively to our situation and connected me with a legal aid attorney who specialized in family law and child protection cases. Your parents have made a strategic error, the attorney Diane explained during our consultation. By filing for grandparents' rights, they have opened the door for all of their behavior to be examined by the court. The documentation from the doctor and psychologist will be powerful evidence against them. But they will deny everything I pointed out. They always have. They are expert manipulators who present themselves as the perfect grandparents to the outside world. Diane nodded thoughtfully. Which is why we need more evidence. Are you familiar with recording laws in our state? I was not, but I quickly learned that we lived in a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record conversations I was part of without informing the other participants. This opened up possibilities I had not considered. I purchased several small recording devices and strategically placed them in my apartment car and purse. I learned that any direct threats or admissions from my parents could be used as evidence in court. My next step was reaching out to Sarah, my childhood friend, who had witnessed some of my parents' abuse firsthand. She had moved away after high school, but had maintained sporadic contact over the years. I always wondered what was really happening in your house, Sarah admitted during our phone call. There were times I suspected something was wrong, but your parents were so good at making everything seem normal to outsiders. Would you be willing to provide a statement about what you did see? I asked. Absolutely, she replied without hesitation. I should have spoken up years ago. I will not make that mistake again. Financial security was my next concern. If my parents followed through on their threats to interfere with my employment, Jamie and I needed a safety net. I approached a community support organization that helped domestic violence survivors achieve independence. They connected me with emergency funds and resources to secure our future. With their assistance, I found a new apartment in a different school district far enough away that we would not run into my parents accidentally, but close enough that Jamie could stay with his current therapist. The lease was signed under a program that kept the specific address confidential, protecting us from being located easily. I created a comprehensive safety plan with Jamie's school and counselor. His teachers were given clear instructions that he was to be released only to me with a password system in place for emergencies. The school counselor worked with Jamie on age-appropriate safety strategies, empowering him rather than frightening him further. As part of my evidence gathering, I applied for copies of my own childhood medical records. Though many were too old to be retained, I did receive documentation of several suspicious injuries that had been treated when I was Jamie's age, broken bones, burns, and concussions that my parents had explained away as accidents. While organizing our belongings for the eventual move, I discovered a box of old family photos my mother had given me years ago for Jamie's sake. Looking through them with new awareness, I could now see what I had missed before. The hollow look in my own eyes as a child, the tension in my small body, when my parents were nearby, the visible bruises, poorly hidden by long sleeves, even in summer photos. These images corroborated my recovered memories and strengthened my resolve. I found unexpected allies during this time. Jamie's teacher, Mrs. Wilson, offered to document the changes she had observed in him during the weeks my parents had been watching him. My elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who had occasionally helped with Jamie after school, provided a character reference attesting to my dedication as a mother. Even my boss, initially frustrated by my absences, became supportive after I explained the situation, offering me flexible hours and work-from-home options to accommodate Jamie's needs. With my documentation growing, I applied for a more permanent restraining order. The temporary order would expire soon, and I needed legal protection that would prevent my parents from approaching Jamie at school or elsewhere. I knew I needed to prepare Jamie for the possibility that he might have to speak to a judge or court representative. One evening I sat with him on our couch, his favorite stuffed dinosaurs surrounding us for comfort. Jamie, remember how the nice lady at the therapist's office asked you questions about what happened at Grandma and Grandpa's house? I began gently. He nodded his small hands, fidgeting with a dinosaur's tail. There might be another grown-up who needs to ask you questions like that. They are helping us make sure Grandma and Grandpa cannot hurt you again. Will I have to see them? He asked, his voice trembling. No, sweetheart. You will not have to see them at all, and I will be right there with you the whole time. What if they do not believe me? The fear in his voice broke my heart. They will believe you, Jamie. You just need to tell the truth exactly like you told me and the doctors. The grown-ups who are helping us know how to tell when someone is telling the truth. As our legal case built, I also focused on securing our important documents and sentimental items. Birth certificates, social security cards, and irreplaceable photos were stored in a safe deposit box at a new bank where my parents had no connections. I made copies of all our evidence and stored them in multiple secure locations. For our protection, I crafted a strategic approach to expose my parents publicly only if absolutely necessary. My attorney advised that courts often sealed records in cases involving child abuse, but that the threat of public exposure could be leveraged if my parents refused to back down. People like your parents care deeply about their public image, Diane explained. Sometimes the fear of exposure is more effective than actual exposure. The night before our scheduled court appearance for the permanent restraining order hearing, I practiced the assertiveness techniques my therapist had taught me. Standing before the bathroom mirror, I rehearsed maintaining eye contact, speaking clearly and confidently, and refusing to be drawn into emotional reactions. "You are breaking the cycle," I told my reflection, "for Jamie and for the child you once were." In bed that night, unable to sleep, I scrolled through my phone contacts and found myself pausing at relatives who had sided with my parents. Aunt Meredith, who had called to berate me for tearing the family apart. Cousin Robert, who suggested I was exaggerating my parents' behavior. Uncle Frank, who reminded me that family sticks together no matter what. With new clarity, I deleted their contacts one by one. Family was not about blood, it was about love, respect, and safety. Jamie and I would create our own family surrounded by people who truly cared for our well-being. Morning came, and with it a sense of calm determination. I dressed carefully in a conservative blue dress that projected both professionalism and maternal warmth. I helped Jamie into his favorite dinosaur t-shirt under a button-up shirt, wanting him to feel both comfortable and special. "Today is an important day," I told him as we ate breakfast. "Today we make sure you stay safe forever." "And you too, Mommy," he asked, his hazel eyes serious. "Yes, baby, me too." I checked our evidence one final time, ensuring every document was in order, every recording clearly labeled, every statement signed and notarized. The path forward was clear. My parents had fed my son dog food and laughed about his suffering. They had psychologically tortured him with the same methods they had used on me as a child. They had threatened to take him from me when I discovered their abuse. Now they would face consequences they never imagined possible. Not through screaming or violence, but through the calm, methodical exposure of their true nature to the systems they had always manipulated in their favor. I would feed them their own hell served cold and with absolute precision. The morning of the court hearing arrived with a strange sense of calm settling over me. Sarah had flown in the night before and would be accompanying us as both moral support and a witness. I had asked Mrs. Wilson, Jamie's teacher, to meet us at the courthouse as well. The more supportive people surrounding Jamie, the safer he would feel. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked as we pulled into the courthouse parking lot. "I have been ready for 30 years, I replied. "I just did not know it until now." My parents arrived separately, each with their own attorney. My mother wore a conservative beige dress that screamed respectable grandmother. Her hair perfectly styled her makeup, subtle but flattering. My father wore a dark blue suit that conveyed authority and respectability. They were playing their parts perfectly, just as they always had. When they spotted me with Sarah, my mother's mask slipped momentarily, revealing the cold anger beneath. She quickly recovered, pasting on a concerned expression as she approached. "Rebecca, darling, this has all gone too far," she said, her voice honeyed with false concern. "We only want what is best for Jamie. Surely we can resolve this as a family." "We will resolve it in court," I replied calmly, not rising to her bait, "where there are consequences for feeding children dog food and locking them in closets." She flinched almost imperceptibly before recovering. "You always did have an active imagination, just like Jamie. Children make up such stories sometimes." "Chemical burns and malnutrition are not imaginary," Sarah interjected. "Neither are the recordings." My father approached, his face darkening. "What recordings?" Before I could respond, our attorneys called us in different directions for pre-hearing conferences. Jamie was taken to a separate room where a court-appointed advocate would speak with him in a child-friendly environment. In the courtroom, the judge reviewed the case files carefully before calling the hearing to order. My attorney presented our evidence methodically. The medical reports, the psychological evaluation, Jamie's documented symptoms, and my own history of abuse at my parents' hands. Then came the recordings. I had captured several damning conversations with my parents in the weeks following the discovery of their abuse. "You are overreacting about a few dog biscuits," my mother's voice rang through the courtroom. "We did the same with you, and you survived. Children need to learn consequences." "Jamie is weak because you coddle him," my father's recorded voice declared. "A few days of hunger never killed anyone. It builds character." My parents' faces grew increasingly pale as their own words condemned them. Their attorneys attempted to object, arguing that the recordings were taken out of context, but the judge overruled them after confirming the recordings were legally obtained. Next came the witnesses. Sarah testified about witnessing my mother force-feeding me as a child, making me stand in corners for hours and calling me worthless when she thought no one could hear. Mrs. Wilson described the dramatic change in Jamie's behavior during the weeks my parents watched him, from a bright, engaged student to a withdrawn, anxious child who flinched at loud noises. The court-appointed child advocate reported that Jamie had consistently described the abuse in age, appropriate terms that children typically cannot fabricate. His detailed descriptions of the taste and texture of the dog biscuits, the darkness of the closet, and the specific threats my parents had made all pointed to lived experience rather than coaching. Throughout the proceedings, my mother's facade of concerned grandmother gradually crumbled. When presented with the photos of Jamie's chemical burns from the dog food preservatives, she actually attempted to justify her actions. "Children need to learn gratitude for proper food," she insisted. "It was a teaching moment." "Feeding a 6-year-old dog food is not a teaching moment," Mrs. Miller, the judge, replied sharply. "It is abuse, plain and simple." My father maintained his intimidating demeanor until my attorney played the recording of him threatening to use his connections to gain custody of Jamie. "We know people in this town," his voice declared. "Judges, social workers. People who understand that children need discipline. We will take the boy and raise him properly, like we should have done from the beginning." The color drained from my father's face as his own voice exposed his intentions. His attorney whispered urgently to him, but the damage was done. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke clearly and calmly about both Jamie's abuse and my own childhood experiences. I described the dog food punishments, the closet confinements, the psychological torture disguised as discipline. I explained how I had suppressed these memories as a survival mechanism, only to have them resurface when I discovered my parents inflicting the same abuse on my son. "Your Honor, my parents are not misguided disciplinarians," I concluded. "They are calculated abusers who deliberately recreated with my son the same patterns of abuse they used on me. They told him the same things they told me. That he was worthless, that no one wanted him, that he deserved punishment for merely existing as a child with normal needs and emotions." During a brief recess, several members of our extended family who had been sitting in the courtroom approached me in the hallway. My Aunt Margaret, my mother's sister, had tears in her eyes. "I always suspected something was wrong," she admitted. "The way Barbara talked about you even when you were a baby. The way she would get so angry if you cried or needed anything. I should have done something." We all should have added my cousin Peter. But they were so good at making everything seem normal, at making you seem like the problem. When the hearing resumed, my attorney called one final surprise witness. My former pediatrician, now retired, who had kept personal notes about his concerns regarding my childhood injuries. Though the official records had been purged after the retention period, his personal documentation provided a damning historical pattern. "I noted multiple suspicious injuries over a period of 8 years," Dr. Anderson testified. "Broken fingers consistent with being slammed indoors, burns in unusual patterns, malnutrition despite the family's financial stability." I reported my concerns multiple times, but the Millers were pillars of the community. My reports were never investigated thoroughly. By the time all evidence had been presented, my parents looked physically ill. Their attorneys requested a brief conference, after which they approached the bench with a proposal. My parents would drop their petition for grandparents' rights and agree to a permanent restraining order if we would not pursue criminal charges. The judge turned to me. "Miss Miller, while I cannot advise you on whether to accept this offer, I want you to understand that you have presented compelling evidence that would likely support criminal charges of child abuse and endangerment. I thought of Jamie, who had already been through so much. A criminal trial would mean more testimony, more exposure, more trauma for him to process. I will accept their agreement to the permanent restraining order and the withdrawal of their custody petition, I decided. But I want the record to reflect the full extent of their abuse, and I want mandatory psychological evaluation and treatment as part of the court order. The judge nodded approvingly. A reasonable request, and one I am inclined to grant. When the final order was issued, it included everything I had asked for. A permanent restraining order prohibiting my parents from contacting Jamie or me in any form, the complete dismissal of their grandparents' rights petition. Mandatory psychological evaluation and treatment for both my parents and court costs assigned to them rather than to me. As the judge delivered her ruling, she addressed my parents directly. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, in my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such calculated cruelty disguised as parental discipline. The court is deeply disturbed by your actions toward both your grandson and your daughter. While Miss Miller has chosen not to pursue criminal charges at this time, be aware that this restraining order will be permanently on record. Any violation will result in immediate criminal consequences. My mother broke down sobbing, not from remorse I suspected, but from the public humiliation she had always feared above all else. My father sat rigid, his face a mask of barely contained rage, as his control was stripped away. As we left the courtroom, several other parents who had been waiting for their own hearings approached me. One woman squeezed my hand. "I heard some of what happened in there," she whispered. "You just gave me the courage to stand up to my own abusive parents. Thank you." Another shared that she had been going through a similar situation with her in-laws and her toddler. I was doubting myself, thinking maybe I was overreacting. Now I know I need to trust my instincts. My parents' carefully constructed facade had crumbled, completely exposing their true nature, not just to the court, but to the community they had manipulated for decades. As news spread through our small town, other stories emerged. Children they had babysat who came home with unexplained injuries, employees at their hardware store who had been psychologically abused, neighbors who had heard crying through open windows but had been assured everything was fine. The metaphorical hell I had fed my parents was not one of my creation. It was simply the exposure of the hell they had created themselves, now visible for all to see. Their social standing, the thing they valued above all else, was destroyed by nothing more than the truth. "Is it over?" Jamie asked as we drove home from the courthouse. "Yes, sweetheart," I assured him. "They cannot hurt us anymore." "Never ever." "Never, ever," I promised, meeting his eyes in the rearview mirror. "We are free now." 6 months passed, bringing changes I could never have imagined. On that terrible day, I discovered my mother feeding Jamie dog biscuits. We settled into our new apartment in a friendly neighborhood with a small community garden, where Jamie quickly made friends with other children. The extra bedroom gave us each our own space, and the sunny kitchen became the heart of our home, filled with the aromas of real nutritious food that Jamie was finally eating without fear. Jamie's physical health improved dramatically. The dark circles under his eyes faded, he gained healthy weight, and his energy returned in full force. His pediatrician remarked on his excellent recovery at his 6-month checkup, noting that children often show remarkable resilience when removed from traumatic environments and given proper support. Sleep, once a battleground of nightmares and anxiety, became peaceful for both of us. Jamie still occasionally had bad dreams, but they decreased in frequency and intensity. When they did occur, he now had the confidence to come to my room knowing he would find comfort rather than criticism. My own healing journey continued through weekly therapy sessions and a support group for survivors of childhood abuse. Slowly, I unpacked decades of normalized trauma, learning to recognize the subtle ways my parents' abuse had shaped my perceptions and decisions. I discovered that what I had always seen as personal failings, my difficulty trusting others, my persistent anxiety, my tendency to apologize excessively, were actually normal responses to abnormal treatment. At work, my increased confidence and focus led to a promotion. The accounting firm recognized my dedication and skill, moving me to a position with more responsibility, but also more flexible hours that accommodated Jamie's needs. Financial stability, once a distant dream, became our new reality. I opened a college savings account for Jamie and began contributing to it monthly, a tangible investment in the future I was determined he would have. We built a support system of genuine friends who demonstrated what healthy relationships actually looked like. My friendship with Sarah deepened as we reconnected over our shared past and current healing. Jamie's teacher, Mrs. Wilson, became a trusted ally, recommending books and activities that helped him process his experiences in age-appropriate ways. Even my boss, Tom, and his wife invited us to family barbecues, where Jamie could play with their children in a safe, nurturing environment. The legal consequences for my parents continued to unfold. Their mandatory psychological evaluations revealed what I had always suspected: narcissistic personality traits and an utter lack of empathy disguised by social charm and manipulation. The court-ordered therapy they received seemed unlikely to create genuine change, but the monitoring ensured they could not easily victimize others. Perhaps the most unexpected outcome was the letters. After a local newspaper published a carefully anonymized story about our case as part of a series on child abuse prevention, I began receiving messages from other survivors. Some shared similar experiences with their own parents. Others were in the process of recognizing abuse in their current family situations. Each letter confirmed what my therapist had been telling me. By breaking my silence, I had helped others find their voices too. I began volunteering with a child advocacy organization, sharing my story with professionals being trained to recognize signs of abuse. The knowledge that Jamie's suffering and my own might help protect other children brought meaning to our pain, transforming it from a shameful secret into a powerful tool for change. As the seasons changed, we established new family traditions to replace the toxic ones of my childhood. Instead of the rigid Sunday dinners of my youth, where children were seen but not heard, we had pajama brunch with dinosaur-shaped pancakes. Rather than the performance-oriented holidays my parents had insisted upon, we celebrated in ways that brought genuine joy, homemade decorations, silly songs, and no expectation of perfection. The freedom from toxic family obligations was both disorienting and liberating. The first Thanksgiving without obligatory family gathering left us momentarily adrift until we accepted an invitation from Sarah's family. Watching Jamie laugh and play with children who were treated with kindness and respect, I realized we had not lost family. We had found our true one. One evening, as I helped Jamie with his homework, he looked up at me with serious eyes. "Mom, are Grandma and Grandpa bad people?" I considered his question carefully. "They did very bad things," I said finally. "Things that no one should ever do to a child. But people are complicated, Jamie. They were probably hurt themselves when they were little, though that does not excuse what they did to us." "Will I ever have to see them again?" he asked. "No, sweetheart. The judge made sure of that." He nodded, returning to his math worksheet. A few minutes later, he spoke again. "I am glad we are a family without them. Just us is better." The simple wisdom in his words struck me deeply. Just us was indeed better, safer, healthier, and filled with the love that should be every child's birthright. The following week, Jamie brought home a drawing from art class titled "My Family." It showed just the two of us holding hands beside our apartment building with a bright sun shining overhead. His teacher had written a note: "Jamie seems much happier these days. Whatever you are doing, keep it up." As I pinned the drawing to our refrigerator, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The question of forgiveness often arose in my therapy sessions and support group meetings. Some survivors found healing through forgiveness, while others rejected the notion entirely. I had come to my own understanding. I could acknowledge that my parents were damaged people perpetuating their own trauma without excusing their actions or allowing them back into our lives. Forgiveness, if it came at all, would be for my benefit, not theirs, and it would never mean reconciliation. What mattered more than forgiveness was boundaries, the firm, unshakable determination to protect Jamie and myself from further harm. Those boundaries had given us the space to heal, to discover who we could be without the constant shadow of abuse and criticism. Breaking the cycle of generational trauma was not a single act, but a daily commitment. Each time I responded to Jamie's needs with patience, instead of irritation, each time I validated his feelings, instead of dismissing them, each time I chose connection over control, I was actively creating a different future than the one my parents had created for me. On the anniversary of the court hearing, I took Jamie for ice cream to celebrate our freedom. As he happily devoured a chocolate sundae, chocolate smeared across his cheek, I watched him with a heart full of gratitude and hope. "You know what, Jamie," I said. "You taught me something really important." "What?" he asked, looking up from his dessert. "You taught me that love is not supposed to hurt, that families should make each other feel safe, not scared." He considered this with the seriousness that children sometimes bring to profound concepts. "Like how you always say, it is okay if I make a mistake." "Exactly like that," I nodded, fighting back tears. "Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is how we treat each other when they happen." That night, after tucking Jamie into bed, I sat on our small balcony looking at the stars. The path we had traveled was not one I would have chosen, but the destination, this hard-won peace, was worth every painful step. We had built something my parents could never understand or create, a home founded on love rather than fear, on acceptance rather than conditional approval, on protection rather than exploitation. The cycle that had begun generations before me had ended with my son. Whatever challenges life might bring, Jamie would face them knowing he was worthy of love, deserving of respect, and never alone. That knowledge was the most precious gift I could give him, one that no one had given to me, but that I had somehow found the strength to create for us both. Have you ever had to break a cycle of hurt in your own life? Comment below and share what helped you find the strength to make that change. Do not forget to like this video if Rebecca's journey touched your heart. Subscribe for more stories of courage in difficult situations, and share with someone who might need to know they are not alone in their struggles. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the family we choose is more healing than the family we were born into.